as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No. I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift. It should have never been made, by the way. Giving the Panama Canal is why Jimmy Carter lost the election, in my opinion, more so maybe than the hostages. The hostages were a big deal.
This is so awesome. Go to Ross Kennedy, the huntsman, on the Twitter. He's the founder of Fortis Analysis, supply chain national security expert. Ross, great to talk to you, man. Thank you for being here again. It's been a while. We spent a good portion of the first segment of the show talking about the history of the Panama Canal and how the engineering marvel that it was and how the French tried and failed. They couldn't do it, and we had the gall to come in and do it, and the importance of it. We basically went over McCullough's book, Between the Seas. But let's bring it to modern times today. What is the strategic importance of the Panama Canal to America, and why is it a problem that China has so much influence over it today?
Yeah, absolutely. So as President Trump said, as the point has been made repeatedly, not only throughout McCullough's book, but elsewhere, the Panama Canal really serves as an extension of the ability of the U.S. to expand its influence worldwide, not only economically, but also in defense of the global commons. It's why the U.S. Navy has really emerged from the Pax Americana era forward as really kind of the sole guarantor of safety of the seas worldwide. And it's what's allowed global supply chains and a more globalist type of economy to flourish. Without the Panama Canal, Thomas Friedman's not able to write his book, The World is Flat, where everything is kind of distributed in a more equal way because the U.S. can now import and export more easily at will. Without the Panama Canal, we're stuck either going, east to west via, the Eurasian landmass and the Suez Canal, which had a similar impact when it was opened back in, I believe it was in the 1800s. Or we would be going from the north to the south and around the Straits of Magellan, South America, which has, historically been a graveyard of ships and empires. So the impact of the ability of the U.S. to no longer have to base an enormous amount of naval assets on the West Coast, to be able to establish shipbuilding in the Gulf of Mexico and on the East Coast, to be able to really have a three-coast naval strategy for force projection worldwide, it cannot be overstated how important of an advantage that is. And so while the Panama Canal, yes, is an engineering marvel, it is an engine and really a single point of failure type of choke point for not only the U.S. economy, but also the U.S. military. Even in the modern age, even in the space race, and even in an era where we can fly about anything, anywhere, the ability to still move tonnage, men, material on the water is far and away the most efficient way to go about it. And so with China now emerging as, particularly all throughout Latin America, but Panama is one of their oldest and longest plays that they've really invested into, China has really infiltrated so much of the management and operation of the canal. Not just the container ports and the dry ports and the bulk liquid ports, like for energy products at either end on the Atlantic and Pacific side, but also in the operation of itself, in the bridges that cross it, in China's ability to force the Panamanian government to look the other way as these migrant caravans emerge from the Darien Gap and begin to move north. In every way, shape, form, or fashion, it is a net good and an enormous risk for the United States to not address the situation, and it is a net good if we do that. And that means in some cases a guy like Trump coming along and using the bully pulpit. And I can tell you from first-person knowledge, the Panama Canal is not a new issue to President Trump in particular, nor to the people that work around him in a strategy and advisory role on national security and economic security. There was an enormous emphasis in the first administration, and some really sharp people looked at the problem of what do we do about the fact that China effectively owns all of the infrastructure at both ends, as well as what's crossing it, and Chinese companies now are infiltrated throughout the management and operation of the canal itself, not just the infrastructure.
That single point of failure is the key word of the whole thing. Point of clarification, what are the three coasts you're speaking of? Is it, I'm assuming east, west, and Gulf of Mexico? Is that the third coast?
Yep, East West Gulf of Mexico. So if you look at how we had to run things in World War II, we really had kind of a bi-coastal strategy. We had some stuff going in the Gulf as well, but really the Gulf Coast has historically been oriented towards shipbuilding and energy management. Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. Although we did build, warships there, but if you look at where most of the Liberty ships were built, they were built on the West Coast. They weren't as much built on the East Coast or in the Gulf, because most of what was being churned out in the Gulf region and in the East Coast during World War II were warships. And so the majority of the Liberty shipbuilding program was on the West Coast. It was in the San Francisco area. It was further south down by Los Angeles. It was up in Oregon and Washington. And the Panama Canal was certainly available to us then, but it enabled us to build ships on one coast, move them get them going in Atlantic commerce as well as Pacific.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And we don't need to take time here. You don't need to be a supply chain and national security expert to realize what would happen if China just decides to shut that down one day in a case of war. It'd be absolutely devastating. What could be done diplomatically or more to get control of it back?
Well, there's provisions in the treaty or in the agreement when we turned it back over to Panama Canal and we gave them the operation of it back. There's provisions in there that U.S. ships will continue to receive special treatment at some level, and that there are mechanisms by which the U.S. can more greatly leverage and throw its weight around to get Panama just to play by the rules under which we originally turned it over. Trump, he wrote a whole book about it, national bestseller for 30 years, Art of the Deal, right? Where a big part of that strategy is you come in with this gargantuan ask or gargantuan negotiating point. And in Trump's case, it's like, if they don't play ball, we're just going to come take it back and they can't stop us. Is that what he intends to do? Possibly. I can't speak for his mind on that. But that is a maximalist option that's on the table. So the goal then would be to negotiate backwards from that to something that is a reasonable, acceptable compromise between the two countries. The U.S. is not a stranger to going into Panama and having to deal with things directly. That doesn't mean that's what's going to happen this time. What could happen, though, is a mix of additional tariffs on Panama itself, expulsion from various free trade or multilateral trade agreements that it's a part of, additional U.S. forces moving into Colombia and really acting as a stopgap on things that are happening in the Darien Gap. You could see additional Coast Guard presence and additional U.S. Navy presence doing interdiction missions on drugs and Chinese vessels coming through the canal. There's a lot of ways in which we would be able to use the threat of force or use economic levers and diplomatic and regulatory levers and arrive at a tangible solution. And a big thing that needs to be done is to identify and eject from influence in Panama any politician, any businessman that has anything associated with the governance of that country, particularly the governance of the canal, that has known or strongly suspected and provable ties to China.
Yeah, wow. I look forward to all of that weight being thrown around. And as I think we stated in the first segment, Panama wouldn't be a country if it weren't for the United States and our warship off its coast, freeing it from Colombia in the very first place. We got about 2 minutes. Let's take this over logistics, like commercial logistics, well, military, I suppose, too, with Greenland and the Arctic. What is the importance of controlling those shipping lanes?
Well, whether you ascribe it to climate change or just the fact that the sun's acting up, or we're in a historical peak heating, cooling type of cycle, whatever the reason is we have seen the retreat of Arctic ice, and it has opened up this northern shipping passage that runs around. It's a hemispheric circle around the Arctic. So most people look at a map and they think, well, that doesn't make any sense. But when you conceive of the world actually what it is, which is not flat, it's a globe, it's a sphere, then what you have is a much shorter route that is beginning to open up between various countries, through Canada, from Alaska, and then you have all of your other Arctic countries, Russia, Scandinavian countries, and they will be able to move goods along this passage. And China and Russia in particular have invested an enormous amount of money, time, and effort into building the ships and infrastructure that would be needed to take advantage of this Arctic passage. Greenland represents the easiest passage to and from the United States, particularly, of course, the East Coast, as well as parts of Europe, to be able to take advantage of this shorter route. But it also shortens, from a national security perspective, it also shortens the route and time it would take for Russia and China to be able to move fleets through the Arctic Circle and approach the United States and Canada coasts with a threat. They no longer have to go all the way across the Pacific or come, out of the Arctic region down into the Atlantic. They would be able to come directly across the top and down. Greenland itself is also incredibly dense with energy reserves, with critical minerals, and it's not as large as it looks like on a Mercator projection of a map, but it's still a very, very, very large landmass that is somewhat habitable, but is exploitable from a natural resources side. And there's 50,000 occupants of Greenland. And if we entered into some sort of mineral sharing arrangement, mineral wealth sharing arrangement with them, as we have with other territories and unincorporated regions that are part of the United States, but are not necessarily voting states, right? They're operate more like semi-autonomous territories. U.S. Virgin Islands is one, Guam, Marshall Islands. Then the people of Greenland would be fabulously wealthy. It would be a place where people could expand, build families if they're tolerant to the climate. But we have all of these resources there that could be utilized for the United States and its allies, and would really give us a tremendous leg up on the energy race, on clean energy in particular, because of the minerals that are there, on EV technology, as well as on traditional fossil fuels, uranium for nuclear power, in addition to the logistics benefits. So it's really a win all the way around that Trump has taken the stance he's taken, and that really Denmark is kind of, they've made some noise about how they're never going to let this happen. But the people of Greenland have expressed a desire for independence recently, and they have expressed an openness and a willingness to becoming in some way part of the U.S. And this would be one of sort of the all-time territorial coups that a president has ever pulled off, including, gaining of Alaska and Hawaii and these things, where the United States inherits massive strategic advantages at a relatively low cost from being the good guy and partnering with them and taking care of those people.
That's great. Ross Kennedy, the Huntsman on Twitter, founder of Fortis Analysis. Ross, great to talk to you again, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.
Very good. Please send this special to anyone you know who laughed at the idea of all three of these things, whether it's some sort of deeper relationship with Canada, Panama Canal, Greenland. They laughed, oh, Trump, what an idiot, what a fool, this is ridiculous, it'll never happen, and why would it anyway, blah, blah. No. The more you talk about it, the more you think about it, it is absolutely essential. And kudos to the President of the United States for having the foresight and the courage to bring it to the forefront and hopefully make it happen. Mike Slater, First TV, spread the word.